engagement summary of the findings of our first phase of engagement on the long-range transportation plan update. First, I'll remind everyone again the background of what we're working on here and where we are within the process, and then I'll get into what we heard from community engagement and remind everyone on the next steps that we have and the timeline we have as we are about to enter the final year of this project. And then we'll have some discussion time. Okay, so we are here to update the state's long-range transportation plan. And the plan we're updating is pictured there, moving forward RI 2040. So this is the limited update at 5 years. And we are doing this federally required update. It's a fiscally constrained update. And we're gonna sort of take a look at what the goals, strategies, actions, projects, everything that was included in that plan, update that based on the current conditions that we see within our transportation system, as well as what we hear from community engagement. So we're right here in 2024. We spent the summer and the fall doing community engagement for about 6 months. And we're just now getting into the winter when we're going to start our drafting of these updates. And we are also going to do another little mini phase of engagement as well on one specific aspect of the plan, which I'll get into a little bit later. But we plan to have a draft in the springtime. And we will go back out to the community, those who we've already talked to, and others to get any feedback on that draft. In the springtime, we'll revise through the summer and have a final draft by the end of the summer that we can take through plan approvals in the fall. It is due December 2025, so we're trying to get it ready to go in advance of that date. Okay, so the events that we've done many. I guess if you just counted these all up, this is about 25, nice clean number, different engagement events as well as a survey. So many of you are aware of a lot of this stuff that we've been doing over the summer, so I won't spend too much time on this. Just to say, overall, we sort of count 883 attendees, if you also count survey responses as attendees, and over 5,000 individual comments that we've logged. So it's been a lot of work on our end. We've done a lot of reading and sort of picking out themes and ideas that are popping up across all these comments to make sense of that big of a number. We did this work at stakeholder events, which you can see are pretty varied. So we've got things like the Freight Advisory Committee, which is a specific user group that has this very important perspective that we need to incorporate. And then we also have some examples like Pawtucket Senior Center or the Woonasquatucket event that we did in Spanish, where we're trying to supplement where we are not going to be hearing from certain perspectives in the state if we just stick with our public workshops and online survey voluntary response stuff. So we tried to make those extra efforts to make sure we had heard at least some from different community groups across the state. And same thing with tabling. We tried to do this in communities that had larger portions of lower income folks, people of color, Spanish speakers, transit riders, zero car holders, things like that. And then we did hold a series of public workshops there at the beginning of the summer as well. A bit more had a chance to share their thoughts. So I'll start off with our engagement event findings. So these are sort of everything that isn't the survey. And I separate these out because they did ask different questions, but also, again, they're going to sort of come from a different population group than the online survey. So again, this is coming from, advocates and people who are really in the know, who show up at things like public workshops. This is coming from tabling, which is just people passing by who really don't think about this stuff on a daily basis. And this is coming from people with a professional focus on transportation, like the Freight Advisory. So that it's sort of a mix of a lot of different groups that are represented in these findings. So the first question, just understanding generally how we're doing at baseline. The findings from this are about averaging around neutral and poor. Um, and it looks like the highest rated mode is car. That's doing the best out of all of the modes. And bicycle is sort of the lowest rated, but they all sort of hover around the same general area, except for car and walking did a lot closer to neutral as well. Within that, why this isn't working so well, the biggest challenges people faced, high level, lots of comments on safety. This was the number one theme within this specific question. That was often focused on walking and biking safety, but also on car and transit as well. The next most common was frequency of transit service, a big comment that we heard a lot. People just needed more buses and trains coming at more times. Road maintenance was another big challenge cited, as well as affordability of both cars and of public transit as well. And these are, again, just like the high level portion of this, and we will be sharing the full document with you after this call as well to dig in a bit more. We also asked more forward-looking question, what would you do if you were governor? What would you do to improve the system and make it better for you and for your community? And the sort of highlight of that question reflected a focus on government funding and processes, which sort of makes sense with the way the question is worded. And a desire to prioritize alternative modes a bit more to find that balance between focusing a lot on cars and focusing on other modes in a way that just reduces the need to drive for every trip. In 2050, the sort of vision statement question that we had, responses we got were, we want to do less driving and we want to see fewer greenhouse gas emissions. We also had a question where we had like jars of different program areas that we could have funding in across our transportation budget. And people could put little dollar bills in them to allocate their own transportation budget. So this is how the funds ended up splitting out, with bike ped and ADA improvements receiving the most dollars. Next, improving existing public transit service, and then third, maintenance of existing roads and bridges. So that was a very fun game that we got a lot of positive feedback on. People enjoyed this. So that's the last highlight of the engagement event findings. So like I said, there's a lot more in that summary that I'll send over. But as you can see, the general highlight was, interest in improving things like safety and public transit, as well as state of good repair for roads and for bridges as well. So for the survey, this is the sort of second half of the engagement work that we did. We worked with many of you to distribute this survey far and wide. So we used a lot of listserv and newsletters that we were able to come across. And the ones listed here are the ones that we had reached out to and that we think sent it out to their listserv. We don't have a official confirmation. Same with social media. We don't have our own. So we did reach out to partners to help us distribute. And then eventually the more traditional online media picked this up as well. And there was an article in WPRI with the survey link, which definitely bumped a lot of our responses up. We can see the date that it was published and the spike in responses. So it was great to get, again, like a broader audience that may not have been following all of these lovely institutions super closely on their own. So with that, we had about 553 responses, and that includes 40 paper responses, which we did pick up from our engagement events. And so there was, about 513 or so online only responses. So this was a voluntary response survey. So naturally, it will have biases and underrepresentations and overrepresentation. So I wanted to list those out. We did ask demographic information in our survey, which we did not do for the engagement events, since most of those were sort of people flowing through. So, but we do have that here for those that were willing to respond to those questions. So the big underrepresentation here was language. We really had very few people who answered this survey who spoke a language other than English, and certainly not many that felt that they were couldn't speak English well. So most people who did respond still spoke both languages well. We did have a couple that were filled out entirely in Spanish. The paper version was in Spanish. The online version was in Spanish translated, and every other language was available upon request, which has its own flaws, of course. But this was definitely an underrepresentation. And that's part of why we wanted to make sure to do that event in Spanish with the Woonasquatucket River Watershed. And we'll be doing another event with them actually soon, as well as another event in Spanish. So we're trying to sort of fill the gaps that exist from this survey. But that's certainly something we still want to think about with our next surveys. How do we beef that up? Race and ethnicity, all of the groups were underrepresented except for white and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, which was just very, very small. And particularly Black and Hispanic or Latino residents are underrepresented in the survey. So again, the same sort of thing with language. We're trying to sort of beef that up through our tabling and through our engagement events to sort of overrepresent that in the engagement events so that we can balance that out here. But we still would love to get more survey responses actually from those groups, and we'll certainly be thinking about how to do that better with our next survey. And then lastly, children. Definitely underrepresented children, which is not super surprising, not usually seen perusing WPRI articles that I'm aware of, but a good thing to keep in mind. And we did get a chance last week to go to the Junior Achievement Career Fair for 8th graders to try and sort of fill this in as well and get a little bit of voice from the youth of our state, which was super fun. So we do have a bit more to add there on the engagement event side. And also we're able to talk to some high schoolers when we were in Kennedy Plaza and things like that too. So that is one area we're trying to fill in as well. Otherwise, we did fairly well in geography. All of the municipalities had at least one response. It was really quite spread across the state with overrepresentation on the east side of Providence. Income was fairly good as well, sort of, small variations, but overall very similar. Same with gender and with people with disabilities. So that's a good thing to see, and we're going to keep working on trying to get those more representative next time. Okay, so excuse me. We asked the general question, how do you feel about the transportation system overall? We didn't break this out into modes for the online survey. As you can see, for both non-business owners and business owners who were able to respond, skews toward poorly, particularly business owners toward that very poorly side. And I include this community event participants at the bottom, which is just from those that we, were interacting with out in the community tabling and at these sort of more community events, just to show that the responses there are a much more normal bell curve, right? Much more centered around neutral. And that's more the passersby who aren't necessarily, choosing to go out of their way to respond to this survey. So it's a good reminder that in addition to those over/under representations I just mentioned, people who respond to a voluntary response survey tend to have a more extreme view on the topic than the average person, right? This is who is going to go out of their way to click on a link and fill out a survey. So good to remember that, that there is that difference in who's responding to this survey. So biggest challenges we also asked in the survey within this response, congestion was the most highly cited challenge by survey respondents. 45% of all respondents mentioned congestion in response to this question, which is a pretty large chunk. So we dug into these responses in particular to take a look at them, and we noticed that about 40% of those responses that were about congestion also talked about alternative modes of travel within the same comment, and wishing that they had better modes of travel that they could use instead of driving to avoid congestion, or just generally talking about the need for those modes to be better. as part of that solution for congestion, which is very interesting, and good to hear that people are sort of recognizing the connection between all of the elements of our transportation system and how that plays out for each. Public transit service came up as the next most frequently cited, as well as safety, both having about 25% of respondents mentioning these specific issues. What would need to change in order to address these challenges? The number one comment in this question was in service frequency and public transit service. So again, we're seeing congestion as the top cited challenge. We're seeing public transit service frequency as the top cited solution. And it wasn't in 45% of the comments, of course, but it was still in quite a few. And definitely something that people see as important in, again, addressing not just the issues for transit riders, but also for drivers who are facing this congestion. People also wanted to see more investments in safety, particularly for active modes of transportation. Again, we're going to see these themes throughout all of the question answers. Maintenance of roads and bridges came next. And then once again, we sort of dug into the comments that were specifically talking about cars. We split it out by mode. And found that about half of the commenters who mentioned cars within this answer and talked about car-related solutions also talked about other modes of transportation. And again, that might have been folks saying, you know, we really need to improve transit because I can't take it right now and I'm stuck in congestion. Or it could be folks who are saying, you know, this is my issue with driving. And then I also, you know, walk to the park with my kid, and this is my issue with walking. So we definitely saw people, again, seeing that interconnectivity between all of the different modes. You know, people are not just, you know, have a car and drive everywhere, don't have a car and never use a car. There's a lot more cross use of different modes of transportation, which I think we know, but sometimes it can get lost in the narrative of this idea of drivers versus non-drivers. So we really did see a mix within those answers. Goals we should be prioritizing. We actually listed out all of the sort of objective, they were called objectives. They were really more like goals that were in the 2040 plan to get some direct response on those goals that were identified and see how people wanted to prioritize those. And the top selected goal areas were design roadways to increase transportation choices and achieve a state of good repair. So those both received more than half of commenters selected those two choices. Those are seen as extremely important. And again, you're seeing that connection, right? We need more choices for how to get around. We also need our roads and bridges to work. We also asked what works well and had some snarky responses to that question, and many did not respond. But for those who did respond, the highest cited comment was about the multi-use paths. East Bay Bike Path, Blackstone Valley, those bike paths were cited as working really well. We also saw a mention of bus service coverage working well for people, just people who saying, well, at least, you know, for me, the bus actually does go where I need it to go. I'm able to use it. And then third was regional rail connectivity. So our connections to particularly to Boston as well as along the Amtrak line. For specific locations and projects, people talked about the Providence area generally and the Washington Bridge. Although this came up a little bit less frequently than I thought in this particular comment, although we definitely got a lot of comments about the bridge sort of throughout all of these questions, certainly. And then North Main Street came close on the heels of Washington Bridge for a number of specific comments, and those were focused on the safety concerns that had been happening there. And those improvements sort of spanned the gamut of a lot of the things we've already talked about, safety, maintenance, and things like that. Okay, so that is our engagement summary. And again, I'm gonna send out that main document so you all have the full summary to take a glance through. And happy to talk with anybody in addition, have, you know, a one-on-one meeting to talk through the responses. I also know many of you, you know, work on these issues in your job in general. So for instance, like I'm planning to sort of capture all of the actual, transit comments and send them over to RIPTA and to the Ride Out Transit team to make sure that you all have this in general, since, it's not only relevant for a 25-year plan. Some of this stuff we can respond to more quickly. So we'll definitely be doing that shortly. So we will get to a discussion. We can go back and talk about all of this, but I wanted to really quickly be sure to mention the next phase of engagement that we're going to be doing, which is particularly on the transportation equity analysis. And this is a federally required analysis. The name is very long and convoluted, but it's essentially an environmental justice analysis, taking a look at the plan and the projects that are included, and conducting an analysis in order to determine if there are disproportionately high and adverse effects for environmental justice areas as a result of this plan as compared to other areas of the state. So looking at the distribution of the projects across the state, are they accruing more in one area over another, and also the impacts to the extent that we can predict them. Are we increasing VMT through low-income communities more so than through other communities? Are the transit service benefits going more to wealthier communities or to lower income communities? Those types of questions. So we are trying to figure out how to do that analysis, the methodology, and the federal government does give us some specific requirements, but a lot of leeway, and they do recommend that we engage with the sort of environmental justice communities to determine the analysis that we do and the methods that we use. So that's what we're hoping to do, and we're going to work with those communities to determine what we should actually consider an environmental justice area for this project. It is, again, somewhat, we have to consider people of color, we have to consider low income, but beyond that, we can determine how we want to do that. We also want to ask that question, what actually makes a project a benefit or a burden for your community? Rather than making assumptions about that, let's actually ask and hear from folks what actually matters to them when a project is happening in their neighborhood. And then, general engagement and feedback on equity and environmental justice. So we're planning to work heavily with the health equity zones on this topic, since they think about equity all the time and talk about equity, and also have really deep connections within their specific communities throughout the state already. So we're already starting to set some of those engagement events up. And we are also hoping to put on a workshop with the Rhode Island Foundation to host a bunch of different community and advocacy organizations to sort of do the more technical, looking at a map and data and getting a bit nitty gritty on how we might actually do this as well. So that'll be coming up likely sometime in January. And then we are going to do one more survey. On the first survey, we did ask people to leave their email address if they were okay with us following up with the second survey link, and a lot of people did. So we'll be sending that out through that, as well as probably through some of those same distribution methods from before. And they will ask questions about this, transportation equity question, as well as some questions about the strategies that were included in the 2040 plan, to get some feedback on those strategies, and how we might want to update those within this update. So that's the plan for the next little phase. We will also be drafting up all of the lovely sections of the plan sort of alongside this. So we'll definitely be busy, but we're hoping to take these findings that we just heard from community engagement in phase 1 to help inform, what these updates look like this winter. Okay, so that's what I have. And I know that leaves a lot of different topics for discussion. We would love to hear about what, your thoughts and questions on the engagement findings, how we should be reflecting those within the draft, how we should be thinking about this next phase of engagement, and just anything else as we start to actually, draft this plan update. And we can also talk about how we want to work with each of you sort of individually as we get going on this. When we're talking about pool of projects and strategies, a lot of those have your agencies as key partners within those. So we want to make sure that we coordinate really well on those as we start to write them up. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording, and we can